Is it just me or is something like different about today? I'm sure it's nothing. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Steven Rodriguez. I'm your true champion. Today, we're going to take a look at the best decks of the set 4 meta in Cardfight Vanguard Zero. Let's get started. Alright guys, here we are at my tier list maker template. If you guys want to give this a try for yourselves and show me your thoughts on the set 4 meta, I'm going to go ahead and leave a link to my template down in the description. Go ahead and check it out if you guys want to. But before I get started, I want to make sure that you guys understand kind of how we do best deck videos here on the channel. Usually what I do is I judge the best decks off of two kinds of criteria. The first criteria being popularity. How popular is the deck in the meta? You know, what's the actual likelihood you're going to fight it? That kind of stuff. That really impacts how good a deck is because, well, does it really matter if a deck is really strong if no one's using it, right? The second part is the power. Like, what can the deck do? What are its combos? What are its win conditions? What are its resources? Stuff like that. That will help determine kind of where it perfectly sits in my tier list. Also, as you can see from my tier list, we have 4 tiers: tier 1, tier 1.5, aka fringe, tier 2, and tier 3. So really quickly, let's explain what these tiers mean. Tier 1 is tier 1. It's the best decks in the game, the most popular, the ones that you'll see probably 9 out of 10 times if you hop into a ranked game. If you play a tournament, these will most likely be like the placings of like the top 3 decks, right? I'm pretty sure we had a tournament like this past weekend for PPG where literally the top 3 decks were like the same deck and they were all MLB. So that's what you should expect tier 1 decks to do. They should be the decks that win. Tier 1.5 is a little bit different. So tier 1.5 or fringe is what I call, these are the decks that are being kind of gatekeepered by the tier 1 decks. Like if the tier 1 decks didn't exist, these decks would be tier 1. However, unlike tier 2 decks, which is the same thing, tier 1.5 decks can actually hold their own against the tier 1 decks. It may not be the most perfect matchup in the world, but it's not a losing matchup, and it definitely could be one if a couple things go your way, or if you're a smart enough player to where you play the game or you play your specific deck with an expertise. A good example of a tier 1.5 deck before I get started is going to be Perfect Razor. Perfect Razor isn't necessarily a tier 1 deck anymore, but given how strong it is, how aggressive it is, it can definitely hold its own against decks like MLB, against Shadows, and even against Dote sometimes. So these are the kinds of things you'll see in tier 1.5. Tier 2 is another story. These are again decks that are being gatekeepered by tier 1, but they're also being gatekeepered by tier 1.5. So these are going to be the decks that were like bad last format. They're kind of still bad this format, but they're not like useless. Like they still have powerful combos that if they get lucky enough, they can steal a game here and there from the tier 1 decks and maybe even the tier 1.5 decks. And then finally, tier 3. Tier 3 is like unplayable. You should not want to build this. If you have it, that's great. If you like playing it, that's great. Until it gets more support, there's no reason to ever play this deck in the current meta right now. It just does not do anything powerful. It just isn't that popular. So don't worry about facing it, but also try not to play it yourselves. That's tier 3. If you guys are enjoying this video and want to see more stuff like this in the future, please be sure to let me know that by leaving a like on this video, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell for notifications so that way you guys know when my videos go live for you. This is, I think, the 4th time I've done a best deck video, but the 2nd time I've done a tier list video. So let me know, what do you guys prefer? Do you guys prefer like the predictions video and then like a tier list? Or do you prefer like predictions and then a separate video about tier lists? Let me know. I'm always interested to see what you guys think. I'm not going to be going over any card effects in this game, so if you guys don't know what these cards do, I definitely recommend you watch my last video for the best decks format, because in that video I explain what all the new cards do and what makes those decks powerful, and then I give my predictions on the best decks. This is just my analysis of what the meta is at this current point in time, now that we've had set 4 for like a week or two. Now that I've gotten all that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and start off with tier 1. We've got MLB. This is the best deck in the game. There's no questions asked here. Literally, this deck took 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place at the PPG Weekend Championships yesterday. So this is the best deck. It is the most popular. It has the most power. It has an inherent crit. It has decent defensive numbers, and it can retire front row rear guards. If you guys don't know, retiring front row rear guards is so powerful in this game because basically it allows you to get an extra attack essentially, because now you don't need to waste one on another intercept if there's 2. So it's a really powerful mechanic to have, and this is what makes MLB way better than Perfect Razor ever was. Up next, we have kind of the, I don't want to say antithesis or like counter, I just want to say like the next best deck, which is my favorite deck right now to play, which is Dote. Dote is probably the only counter that MLB has in this format right now. I shouldn't say the only one. I should say the most obvious one. This is the most obvious counter that exists because we have the ability to control them. There are some cool playstyles that you can do with Striking and Tages to just eliminate any MLB's advantage and even try and beat them. The strategy of riding Striking and then riding Dote to swing twice with a crit against an MLB deck is so powerful, you guys. It's not even funny. Like, that can just like end the game right there. There's also other tools, like I said, Tages, or just your generic cross ride numbers to where you can survive, bleed them out of grade 1s. They can't pressure you. Like, this deck has all the tools it needs to defeat MLB, and it does it a lot. The problem, though, and the reason why it's not better than MLB itself is because MLB is good against every deck. Like, MLB is so good against every deck, it makes certain decks tier 2 just because it exists. Dope doesn't really do that. Dope doesn't really just outright beat anything. It is like the grinder. It is the deck that if you're good with it, you're the best. You'll be fine, right? So it requires a higher skill cap. It doesn't have the most outright easiest matchups in the world, and because of those factors, it'll make it less popular, thus making it less like tier 1 than MLB. But still, it's a great candidate for number 2 deck for sure. Moving on, we kind of have a surprise deck that I feel like people just keep forgetting is like one of the best decks in the game right now, which is Tsukuyomi. Tsukuyomi is still doing everything it needs to do. It still has Tom, it still has deck stacking, it still has drawing cards, and it's still tier 1. Would I say that it's the 3rd best deck? I would argue no. It would probably be like the 4th or 5th best deck after like some of the other cards in tier 1. But here's the thing. Tsukuyomi is the only deck in the game, and you cannot argue this, that has an absolute win condition, right? If you're at 5 damage and I call a Tom, you need a heal trigger, otherwise you lose. You know, that's an absolute win condition, which no other deck has right now. And Tsukuyomi is so good at getting to that win condition that if you're a good pilot with Tsukuyomi and you can navigate the MLB matchup a bit better, you'll be fine. It doesn't hit cross ride numbers very well, and that's like its biggest weakness right now. If it somehow had a way to give Tom 18k attack, oh my god, this deck could probably be the best deck in the game, if I'm being honest, but it doesn't. And that's a big thing holding it back right now, is its weakness against cross ride numbers, thus making it less popular. Moving on, let's go ahead and get some tier 1.5 decks in here. One of my favorite decks, Beast Deities. Now, this is like lumping up, like this is 2 decks really. So this is Beast Deities pure, and then it's Beast Deities with Razors. That's what this deck is. So like it's Good Stuff Novas, and then it's like Beast Deities plus Razors. That's what this one is. I think they're in the same spot, and I'll tell you why. First things first, the Beast Deity deck that I profiled the other day was kind of like an anti-meta deck. Like, it was designed to defeat MLB and Dote because of cards like Boomerang Thrower, your Natural Advantage, and Miss Splendor. You were able to kind of get the game into a board state where you had the most advantage, and then you could win the game. The reason why it's not actually tier 1 and just tier 1.5 is that it loses so badly to Tsukuyomi. This deck cannot hold a candle to Tsukuyomi, and it has problems against like really aggressive rearguard based decks, like say Spike Brothers, or even itself. Like the mirror match with this deck sucks, I bet. The other deck though, Beast Deities plus Razors, the reason why it's in tier 1 is kind of the same reasons why Perfect Razor is going to be in tier 1.5. I'll just go ahead and grab Perfect Razor right now too. He's in the same spot. This deck is better though than Perfect Razor because it has more tools, and it's, I just think, the better version of Perfect Razor. Like if you're playing Perfect Razor, play the mixed version of Perfect Razor with Azure Dragons. That one's far better than the regular version because you can just do more things to your opponent late game. But Perfect Razor is still strong and still solid by itself. And a big thing like that keeps Perfect Razor back is it is not that great against Dote, and it's not that good against MLB because MLB does everything it wants to do plus retiring. This is what keeps Perfect Razor back from being tier 1. However, it is still tier 1.5. Let's do another tier 1.5 deck. We got Good Stuff Kagero. Good Stuff Kagero is this, like, you know, waterfalls, your blockades, your dual axe arc dragons, all that stuff. But this deck is still solid. You don't really need Dotes right now to play a good Kagero deck. Like, this deck can beat MLB. This deck can beat, probably not Dote, but it can do a good job against Dote, I bet. This deck can beat Tsukuyomi. The biggest problem with this deck is just that sometimes it lacks power. Sometimes all it's doing is making good, consistent columns that just try and kill your opponent. And right now, it feels like the more the game goes, it's hard to, like, justify that that's all you do. I will say that this is the best retire deck in the game right now, too. So if you want to, like, control your opponent a bit more and kind of make it to where the game gets to a place where whoever makes the best numbers wins, and then that's going to be you because you retire cards and they don't. That's a really good strategy and makes this deck really viable. However, this strategy will not last very long because once Gold Paladins come out, this strategy becomes awful because Ezel can just refill any board you want to with like 2 counterblasts. So like there's no point in retiring cards in the future unless you're Narukami and you do it for like an aggressive purpose. So yeah, while Good Stuff Kagero is still good and we'll definitely see plenty of play, even though Dote is by far the best Kagero deck, it still holds its own. So if you don't have Dotes, don't fret. You can still play Kagero if you want to, as long as you have the other cards from say set 1. Let's just go ahead and go in order now. Let's go ahead and start with Pale Moons. Pale Moon's tier 2, and it's not because it doesn't do powerful things. Like multi-attacking is still really strong. I think multi-attacking is less strong in this game than say in the real life game because defensive triggers naturally is just like not a good thing for this kind of strategy, and defensive triggers in general just kind of suck. So in general, I think this is like a permanent tier 2 deck until it gets Lugia support, and then once it does get Lugia support, I think it'll bump up to tier 1.5, maybe even tier 1 if we get the nerfs at the same time. Next up is Amber Dragons. This is the worst Kagero deck right now, no questions asked. If they ever unnerf this card and give it like the Retire 2 effect again, who knows? It could like jump up to tier 1. I wouldn't be surprised. I think once Gold Paladins come out still though, retiring effects just become so much worse. So even if they did nerf it, if they nerfed it around the time Ezel came out, it'd be like, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like there's a deck that just like hard counters us, so who cares? But yeah, low tier 3, if this is all you have as a Kagero deck, don't play Kagero. Play something else. Next up is Stern Blaukluger. I'm going to give this high tier 2. And the reason why this is high tier 2 is because I've lost playing Dote against Blauklugers because this deck, if it just gets a little bit lucky, this infinite restand with Toolkit Boy is just so powerful that like you can steal games, and that's pretty cool. And and cards like Eisenkugel are still strong, hitting good numbers in rear guard. I think this deck is pretty solid, especially like I bet you could like do a funny deck that like has like Beast Deities in it with Blouse and then like Boomerang Thrower and try and make it like an anti-meta Blaukluger deck. That sounds pretty cool to me too. I don't know how consistent that would be, but it could be cool. Next up is Coco. This is probably top of tier 2. Like if I had to pick a top tier 2 deck, it'd be Coco. And the reason why is because why would I play Coco when I can play Tsukuyomi, right? So like everything that makes Tsukuyomi good is what makes Coco good, but Tsukuyomi just does everything Coco wants to do and better. So if that makes sense. Because literally there are cards that do the same thing, whether you have 6 soul or whether you have 0 soul, like Gaga and like Angels or whatever. But then you have this deck stacking, which Tsukuyomi has, which is so powerful. The argument for Coco, I think, though, to be better than Tsukuyomi is that Coco does make better numbers. Like there are cards in Coco that allow you to hit better numbers on Vanguard and Rearguard, thus you're better against cross-right decks. That's a good argument. However, you still don't have the most automatic win condition, and I would argue that an automatic win condition is more powerful than, say, extra rearguard numbers. So that's why Coco's a high tier 2 to me. Moving on with OTG decks, we have Imperial Daughter. This is bottom of tier 3 where she belongs. This deck, in my opinion, was never good because decks like Perfect Razor and Good Stuff Kagero existed at the time, so this deck would never win a tournament or anything. But now with decks like MLB, with decks like Razors, and with decks like freaking Shadow Paladins, this deck just becomes super just bottom tier. If you want to play it, go ahead, but like it's not gonna win. It's just not. Next up, we have Galahad. This is bottom of tier 2. This is like the worst version of Royal Paladins right now because like MLB does everything this deck wants to do easier, better, and retires things more often, and doesn't really lose anything for retiring. Like retiring in Galahad sucks because then you can't get your crit. Retiring in MLB rocks because then you can still have your crit and then, you know, use it to attack them more often. So yeah, Galahad is bottom tier 2 because MLB is just better in every single way. So why wouldn't you play MLB? But it's not tier 3 because it can still win plenty of games that these decks can't win because it is Galahad and it is kind of like a super diet MLB deck. Next up is Garmor. Garmor, this is like Garmor, but it's also like you could argue this is like MLB Garmor too. I think MLB Garmor is with MLB versus with this Garmor card, but you can justify that for yourselves. I think it's bottom of tier 1.5 because being a pure defensive deck right now seems a little like it seems good because this deck is super hyper aggressive with decks like, you know, MLB and then eventually Shadows. But I feel like defense isn't really the best way to play right now because eventually this crit's gonna get you and you're gonna need to like just survive by PGs, and this deck can't draw PGs. That's why it has the defensive of intercepts. So I'm not a big fan of it, but it's still a really good deck against like Novas. Again, I would argue it's pretty fine against Kagero because you can hit good numbers with this deck. Tsukuyomi depends. I think this match has always been like super sketch to me, but it's solid, I guess. So yeah, bottom tier 1.5. Next up is Grand Blue. I wish this deck was better, but it's not. It's bottom. It's tier 3. It's better than Imperial Daughter just because I like it better than Imperial Daughter, but it's tier 3 no matter what because it just needs more support. It just doesn't have the tools that it needs to win a game. Like whatever good things this deck does, another deck can do it better or easier, or it just has more power, and it just is lacking so much power, and because of that it's lacking a lot of popularity. So there's just no reason to ever play this deck when you can play other things. I even think like once we get Cactus and Thanatos, like even though that's better and that's support, it's still pretty, it's still gonna be like bottom tier 2 if anything, and that's just sad to me. All right, next up we have a new deck that drops this Wednesday, I think. Neo Nectar, specifically Maiden of Trailing Rose / Jean, I think the card's called, the grade 3 that like calls 2 grade 2s. From what I've seen from the Japanese server, this deck is pretty solid actually. It's a very good, consistent deck. If you guys want to know what the cards do, I'll leave a link to the Vanguard Zero meta database. You guys can find out what the Neo Nectar cards do that are coming out. But basically, it's like a super consistent, aggressive deck because you can like use a grade 3 to call 2 grade 2s. You can use Maiden of Trailing Rose to constantly refill your board. So it's basically like the opposite of like Good Stuff Kagura, where all you try and do is retire your opponent's rear guards. This one, I try and just make my rear guards the same every single turn. Being able to turn a grade 3 into 2 intercepts is really good for both offensive and defensive purposes. That's like a really nice balance. I think this deck is super consistent. I also think that once it drops this Wednesday, it'll become pretty popular. And by that justification, I'm going to give it the bottom of tier 1.5. Do I think this is better than any tier 1 deck? No. Do I think it is decent enough to beat all the tier 2 decks? Yes. Do I think it can hold its own against the tier 1.5? Yeah, I think it actually can. I think it actually beats Novas. I could see that argument. It beats Novas. I could see that. But I think Novas is still better against the field as a whole because it does more aggressive things, and this deck doesn't really seem the most aggressive thing to me. But who knows? It could be. So this is like a cop-out guess, but I'm gonna give it bottom to 1.5. I think it'll be super solid. I don't think it'll be like the best deck we've ever seen, but I think if you're committed to playing it, you'll see some good results. And then we have some more tier 3 candidates. We have Dark Irregulars and Pacifica. These both go right here, tier 3, because, oh, by the way, Pacifica is like all Bermuda decks. Even with the boost to Reindeer and Riviera, I'm not a big fan of Bermuda. I may lose to Bermuda a lot. That's because I get sacked by Bermuda a lot, so it's not really a good representation of how good the deck is. You know what? You know what? Never mind. People are gonna get mad. I'm gonna give it bottom of tier 2 because, and no, actually, you know what? I thought of a reason for this. Pacifica's Mega Blast is really strong. I've lost to this Mega Blast before, so I'm going to give it bottom of tier 2. This is strong. The boost to Reindeer, the boost to Riviera is really nice, so we're going to give those bottom of tier 2 because it does deserve to be there. Now Dark Irregulars, however, bottom of tier 3 for sure. Like, when your boss card does more harm to you than good, like, the amount of time I've seen people use No Life King and then check a heal trigger astounds me. They don't get to heal because they technically have 0 damage when they attack this card, and oh my god, it's just the most funny thing I've ever seen. So like, I'm not a big fan of that. And I will say though that all the decks that I've said right now, like Pacifica, Pale Moon, Dark Irregulars, I'll get to Deep Police in a second, like, these decks will become better once they get more support. Like, Dark Irregulars become super cool. Regi's really powerful. Coral has been making some waves in JP right now, so that's pretty cool. Lukier, like I said, is going to be super good when it comes out. And then, you know, Great Danyusha is going to be super awesome. So, like, keep in mind, guys, this is like for this set at this point in time. This is what the tier list is, right? It's not like this will always be what it is. It's just right now for like the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks. That's it. Next up is Shadow Paladins. This is like the final tier 1 deck. I'm going to give it, I think it's better than Tsukuyomi. But like, here's the thing about Shadows. Like, there are moments when like it feels like this is the way it works, or even feels like this is the way it works sometimes. Like, Shadows is one of those decks where like it feels so toolboxy, so advantageous, so pressuring that it can literally just beat anything it wants to, and that's true. But it has some general inconsistencies, being that it's both a Persona Blast deck, a Ride Chain deck, and inherently, if the game goes too long, you could deck out. The amount of people that I've decked out using Dote against Shadows is kind of astounding to me. So like, there are just little things that can happen that make this deck kind of unviable or just like awkward to play with from what I've seen. So I'm not a big fan of it. However, its matchup spread is super solid. It can hold its own against MLB, against Dote, against Tsukuyomi. Like, I don't think it hardcore loses to anything. but I don't think it hardcore beats anything other than like Imperial Daughter and stuff. So that's why I think it's less than Dote and MLB, but it can definitely, if in the hands of a good pilot and you get a little lucky, or just like I mean like a little bit, like you get like everything you need and then like 1 or 2 triggers that are like magic, boom, you win the game, I think. So that's a really good thing, I think, for the deck. Next up, we have Seafried. This is a great candidate for tier 1.5. I think if this deck is in the hands of someone like Jason, aka Living Proof, or Crushing the Meta, or an old school player like Zach, like if you're a hardcore Spikes player, this deck really doesn't lose anything from this format. It can hit good numbers against MLB. It can still be one of the most aggressive decks in the game. This is a good example of a deck that just like beats the anti-meta Azure Dragon deck, because it just is so rearguard pressuring that it doesn't matter how much advantage you gain over the Spikes player, they can still pressure you so hard because of cards like Seafried, Skydiver, and Devil Summoner. Like, them being able to superior call out of nowhere and create pressure with that is so powerful that, like, if they just get a little bit lucky, like, they could beat anything they wanted to. And if they're a smart player, they can do it even more. So I'm a really huge fan of Spikes right now, still in this format. Is it the best deck? By no means. Do you need to be like a really good player? Yes, but is it strong? Of course. And then finally we have D-Police, specifically Enigma Storm. You could like call this like good stuff D-Police that plays like Platinum Ace, Dayusha, that stuff. This is all lumped into one thing. This is like middle of tier 2. Like I'm gonna say it's worse than Pale Moon, but better than Galahad, and definitely better than Pacifica. And yeah, the reason is just that, like, again, this is like a diet MLB type thing. Like, everything D-Police wants to do right now, MLB just does better. I will say that once we get like Great Dayusha in the future and potentially the nerf to MLB, there's a great argument to say that Great Dayusha is the new MLB, but I'm not sure if that argument holds up as much as people think it is, because it does require more things than MLB does. But with all the buffs they give it, it could be a lot easier to do. So there'll be a cool argument in the future once Set 7 drops and we get Great Dayusha that it's the new MLB, but not in the sense of it's going to be the most popular, powerful deck. It's just going to do the MLB things the best, because the nerf will hurt MLB a little bit. But yeah, guys, that is my current tier list for the Set 4 meta in Cardfight Vanguard Zero. It's pretty obvious. Like, the best 3 decks are, of course, MLB, Dote, and Shadows, but I think with the inclusion of tier 1.5, if you want to play these decks, you should not be afraid to. They can definitely hold their own. Some of them are actually designed to beat these decks. Like, I think Good Stuff Kagero and like the Beast DD deck that I showed you guys the other day, like, those are like the best anti-meta decks in the game right now, because boosters are so important, pressure is so important, and the ability to get rid of Wingull and Conroe hurts these 2 decks right now so much. It's not even funny, like, how much. Like, killing the Wingull Brave, if your deck can do that, you can beat MLB if you're smart enough, I promise. So that's why I'm really a big fan of the Beast DD deck. Hopefully I can build it for myself in the future. Alright guys, I'll go ahead and do it for this tier list video. If you guys did enjoy, please be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notifications so you guys know when my videos go live for you. If you have any questions about this tier list or any decks that you want to talk about for Set 4 or the future of the game, please leave them down in the comments below. I would love to hear them, or better yet, hop into my Twitch channel. I go live every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday in the morning, Pacific Standard Time, and I do all kinds of Cardfight Vanguard and Vanguard Zero content over there. So come hang out, ask some questions, and just have a good time. But anyways, guys, with all that being said, as always, I've been your TrueChampionSteven. Please be sure to work hard, rest easy, live well, stay safe, and I will see you all next time. Peace.